Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and today I want to talk about what is probably my favorite Star Wars book, that being I, Jedi by Michael A. Stackpole. Now, this is an odd one. So I first want to, I'm probably going to do a few videos on this, frankly. I'm looking at three just based on the bookmarks that I have. Um, may wind up honestly being more at some point. But before I jump into any of that, I want to just really basically give you an introduction to what this book is and what it's about. So, this is featuring a character named Corran Horn, who we see on the cover of the at least the old edition, um, who was first introduced by Stackpole in the X-Wing series, which takes place very shortly after the original trilogy. Um, he he's a fascinating character. He's a Corellian, so the same planet as Han Solo and Wedge Antilles and a lot of other major Star Wars characters. And so he has a very sarcastic edge to him. So he is a fantastic character. I like a lot of his appearances, especially in the X-Wing books, and then moving on to I, Jedi, this one as well, and then moving forward. Um, he begins as just a fighter pilot who eventually comes to find out that he's of Corellian Jedi lineage. Eventually trains to become a Jedi and becomes one of the prominent Jedi characters in the later post Endor EU. And so this book in particular, I, Jedi, is an odd one from a Star Wars EU perspective, because first of all, it is entirely in the first person. This is written as if it were a personal recounting in the first person by Corran Horn, the main character. And the other thing that makes this book a little bit odd is that it is a retelling from another perspective of most of another story. And that other story is the what's called the Jedi Academy trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson, another great EU author who has his various strengths. Now, it's a retelling from a very different perspective because Corran Horn was not in the Jedi Academy trilogy, at least not by name. And so this book gives some reasons for why he didn't show up, why he wasn't talked about, and why he suddenly has a prominent role. Now, one criticism of this book, which is, I suppose, fair, is that this can kind of read like a kind of character insertion, almost fan fiction, which I can understand the criticism, right? This is, on this sort of negative view of the matter, this is Stackpole's retelling of someone else's story, adding his own original character to it, and taking it for a very different reason. Right? The Jedi Academy trilogy is in part about Luke Skywalker restoring the new Jedi Order and teaching his first group of students. But then it's also about the fall and recovery of Kip Doran. It's about various adventures with Han Solo and Chewbacca. It's about the attempted kidnapping, partially successful kidnapping of Anakin Solo, the youngest of Han and Leia's children. It's about Admiral Akbar's fall from grace and eventual again restoration. There's a lot going on in the Jedi Academy trilogy that Stackpole really doesn't bother with in I, Jedi. This does, however, in the first half or so, through around, I don't know, here, something like that, cover the primary events of the Jedi Academy trilogy that happen on Yavin 4 at Luke's Praxium. But then also, he goes in a very different direction with it because this is Corran Horn's story. It's also about Corran trying to rescue his wife Mirax, who's gone missing. And that's the major hook of the story. So there's a ton going on here. And only some of it is a kind of crossover or retelling with the Jedi Academy trilogy. So I really like this. I like to see EU authors telling stories about the same events, but from these radically new and radically different perspectives and going a completely different direction with them. Anyway, I really like that aspect of the book. I also just really like the character writing by Michael Stackpole. He is probably the best. The only in terms of sort of military sci-fi in as far as Star Wars EU authors, particularly in terms of like space combat and starfighters and that sort of thing. The only competition really is Aaron Alston, the other author of the X-Wing series. But I tend to prefer Stackpole's writing, if only a little bit. In any case, I also want to talk about, in this first video on iJedi, I want to talk about one of the really prominent themes of this book, which isn't about specifically Luke Skywalker reforming the Jedi Order, because we get plenty of that, sure. And we get plenty of Corran Horn being a Jedi, we get plenty of him being a cop, we get plenty of him being a Corellian, we get all this stuff. But one of the main features, one of the main themes of this book that I love so very much, and especially now, now as a relatively new parent, I'll say relatively new. My oldest kid is at time of recording 6 years old, almost 7, so I'm not that new of a parent. But we get a lot in this book of Corran Horn discovering the importance of family and finding his place within his various family relationships. And a lot of it is done with a great deal of care, of love. It's just, a lot of it's just wonderful. And it starts right from the beginning of the book. Like I said, the entire point of this book, the main sort of inciting incident is his wife Mirax disappearing and him having to go and find her. But even before that happens, and I won't tell too much about spoilers, at least until I put up a little spoiler tag. But even before Mirax goes missing and he goes off on his adventures, we get a wonderful little event that sets the stage for Corran sort of coming to some realizations about family, right? Because he and Mirax have been at the start of this book thinking about having children, and so this is part of what gets him really thinking about this. So this is on his way back home, and he's on Coruscant, and he's looking over a lot of the destruction wrought during the Dark Empire series, where there was there were battles over Coruscant and such. And so he's on public transportation, and he looks over, and he says, "A mother and child in a seat up the way from me caught my eye. I watched the woman smile as the infant reached out unsteadily and grasped at her nose. She tilted her face up slightly, kissing the hand, then lowered her face until she was nose to nose with her baby. She whispered something and rubbed her nose against the child's, then pulled back, accompanied by the baby's laughter. The infant's delighted laugh still echoed in my ears as the bus broke from the darkened canyons and started flying across a ruined landscape of Duracrete chunks strewn like a dewback scales on a stable floor. The burnout husks of airspeeders lay twisted and half melted all over the place. Scraps of cloth that had once clothed victims flapped and fluttered from various points in the stone piles. Bright bits of color that could have been anything from toys to the shards of a holodisc player littered the landscape. Despite the utter destruction, the child's laugh overwhelmed it all. The laugh was innocent and light. It mocked the ruin surrounding us. People could create and destroy, but the laugh seemed to suggest anyone who thought destruction was more powerful than creation was a fool. Within the first 10 years of that child's life, the scars from the battling on Coruscant would be erased. And even if they were not, that child could, in 20 or 30 years, be the person who saw to their erasure. Life truly was the antidote to destruction. If we live... skipping ahead of it. If we live for the present and in the present, we shortchange the future. Living for the future is necessary if we are to have any sort of future at all. It's this realization that our legacy is more than just what we do, but it's the people we impact. And especially in a familial context, which this is also, I will mention, one of the books that formed so much of the idea of Corellian society, and especially the Corellian Jedi, or the Green Jedi, which I'm a big fan of, to the point where we learn a lot about the Corellian Jedi, or the Green Jedi, having families and having these lineages of generations of Jedi who passed on this knowledge in not just a traditional way, but in a familial way. And so later on in the book, we find Corran doing so much more here as well. When he winds up going back to Corellia for reasons that I won't get into again, because I don't want to spoil too much, he winds up discovering some things about his past that he had not really known before, because his father died when he was a young man. Excuse me. And so he's trying to sort of get back in contact, get back in touch with the legacy that was left to him by his father. And so he goes to meet with his grandfather and learn some things about his past. He describes it as a past I never knew about. A renewed respect for someone who proved himself a better friend than anyone could have ever hoped to have. And it goes on to where he basically goes out on the town with his grandfather, who he'd known growing up, who had been a great supportive figure for him, but had been, grandfatherly, had been an older man, and had been helping raise him as a young boy. And then he left for years, and now he's coming back as a full-grown man, and it describes it as, he says, I discovered in my grandfather that night someone I had never known before. Of course, my first relationship with him had been established as a child to a man, which brought with it certain behaviors. By the time I moved into adulthood, I joined Corsac, that's Corellian Security, who's a cop, and our relationship shifted to more of a professional one. This is not a deliberate shift, but a natural one, since our job has dominated our lives. While I could speak to him about my romantic entanglements, that again was a youth speaking to an elder. And then, when my father died, the pain we both felt battered us emotionally to the point where sharing feelings hurt too much. So we stoically didn't touch upon subjects that would reopen old wounds. On this night, for the first time, I was able to relate to him as just one adult to another. It was an odd feeling, yet one in which I took great pride. Here was the man who knew my father and Nija better than anyone else. If he could like me, if he could respect what I had done, then there was a good chance they would have also. And so he starts getting approval from his grandfather in a way that you would as peers, rather than as a child seeking approval of a parental or grandfatherly figure. And so he's going back to his roots, but he's going back to his roots not just professionally, which he is. He's going back in a sort of investigative manner to try and find his wife. And he's not just going back to his roots in a locational place. He's not just going back to his childhood home or his home planet or anything like that. He is going to the people who helped make him who he was and who he is and who he's becoming, and find what that legacy means. And not just the practical, this is what they want from me, this is what I am now. It's get to know them and get to know the factors that shaped him so that he can move forward. And so, again, I absolutely love this thematically, because, again, when you reach adulthood, you don't always have a chance to sort of establish an adult relationship with your elders. A lot of times we get stuck in the relationship of the past. We still are treating our parents like as if we are still children, interacting with them. An easy habit to fall into. But I think that there's a great value in what Corran is doing here, especially given that he's dealing with a lot that requires self-reflection throughout the book. And so finally, of course, because it is about rescuing his wife, there's a beautiful, sweet reunion between the two. He gets help from Luke Skywalker. It's a whole thing. Again, I won't spoil any plot details, just because you should absolutely read this book. It is phenomenal. It is, as I said, probably my favorite Star Wars EU book. With a little bit. So Luke is essentially about to rescue Mirax. and it's about to wake her up from a kind of uh, stasis. Technobabble stuff. Don't worry about it. and he stops Luke. He says, "She's my wife. I'd like to help. You bring her out of it, and I'll let her know she's been missed." Luke nodded and waited for me to come around on Mirax's other side. "Let's do it." I gave him a nod, and then leaned down and kissed my wife on the lips. And basically just recreating that very typical Sleeping Beauty, just in the with a wonderful Star Wars twist. And they wind up getting back together, and everyone lived happily ever after. I mean, for a while, because it's Star Wars, and there's always some new chaos happening in the galaxy. But they do wind up deciding that they're going to have children. They wind up having 2 children, who wind up going on to become very important as events go forward and everything. And so this is a kind of this book serves as a kind of character exploration and character solidification for who is one of my favorite Star Wars characters, that being Corran Horn. With a lot of interesting things going on, and a lot of other interesting things to talk about as well. But hopefully this video has given you a good view of some of the themes of the book without getting into too many plot details that'll spoil things. And will give you an incentive to actually read it for yourself. I will be, like I said, I've got a few other things to talk about in here. I've got other colored bookmarks. So those videos are probably going to get into a little bit more in plot detail. So what I would say is, by the time those come out, try and get a hold of this book and try and read it. There is an audiobook version of it, but it is I think the official one is abridged. But I think there are some decently good unofficial unabridged audiobooks. And I would, as with most Star Wars EU books, I would very, very highly recommend you stay away from the abridged ones, and especially for something like this, read the unabridged one. Read the actual book if you can, if you've got the time and if you can find one. This was a very difficult copy to get a hold of because I don't have my old one. But beyond that, like I said, feel free to look around and find as long as you find an unabridged version of it, highly, highly recommend giving it a read. It's a fantastic book. Anyway, that's all I have to say about this book for right now. Like I said, expect some more coming, and I'll see you then.